Welcome to Handmade with Holly. Thanks so much for joining me. My name is Holly Michelson, and I'm an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator from Del Mar, New York, just outside of Albany. I'm really excited to show you these adorable cards that I have today using the Awesome Otters stamp set. Now, before I go ahead and tell you more about this, I just want to remind you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just click on the red word subscribe. And if you click on the notifications bell, then YouTube will let you know each time I upload a new video so that you won't miss any of my awesome projects. Now, today I'll be featuring this Awesome Otters stamp set, which is free during Celebration. With every $50 purchase, people can earn this Awesome Otters stamp set totally free, and it really is awesome. These critters are adorable. In addition, I've used Simply Marvelous Designer Series paper. This is 6x6 Designer Series paper, and this is also free during Celebration with a $50 purchase. So if you make a $100 purchase from either the annual catalog or the January through June 2022 mini catalog, then you can earn both of these products for free and be able to make these really great cards. In addition to these supplies, I did bring in a few other things. I used a few stamps from Sweet Conversations. This is really a fun stamp set. I used it for these conversation hearts, the inside sentiment. I also used coordinating dies to cut out those hearts, and then this banner die in order to make my sentiment label right here for this otter card. These are called the Sweethearts dies. I also used one stamp from Happiest of Birthdays on the inside of this card for the It's Your Day. Purely optional. I'm sure you have something birthday related that you can use. And I used some dies from the Encircled in Beauty dies, as well as a number of circles from the Layering Circles die set. It's a really great die set where you get the 4 dies shown here that we're going to use today, as well as all these other additional sizes of circles and scallop circles. So these are kind of must-have go-to set. I use these constantly. Highly recommend those. All right, and we're also going to use a variety of Stampin' Blends today and maybe some embellishments like these gems or this glittered organdy ribbon. All 3 of these cards were made in a similar fashion. I had variation on all of them. You can see these 2 are horizontal. This one is in a vertical orientation. And I also used different dies from what I showed you to come up with these combinations of frames for my otters. And so I can go through those specifically one by one, but really the basis of the card is fairly similar. So I think what we'll do is we'll just make one card today in the interest of your time. And then at the end, I'll talk about what was different in order to make these cards. I think we're gonna make this birthday card today, and that's purely because I have an immediate need for another birthday card. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and make this one. But I do want to point out that I have been doing a video series over the past few weeks of clever ways to make Valentines using non-traditional Valentine stamp sets. I'm trying to show you ways to get more mileage out of your stamp sets. The first one that I did featured the Turtle Friends bundle, and this is a bookbinder fold. And then the second video that I did featured Welcoming Window and Sweet Ice Cream, and I combined the 2 to make this lovely ice cream shop storefront. And it's a window card where you're looking through at the ice cream cone. After this video, go ahead and check out these other 2 videos for some fun Valentine ideas with some non-traditional Valentine stamp sets. But I did want to point out that one of the cards that I'm featuring today is my 3rd in that series, and that's this one. So I've used Awesome Otters, and I paired it with the Sweet Conversations in order to make this adorable Valentine. And I just thought with the otter hugging the little fish, that it really fit with the Hug Me stamp in Sweet Conversation. And with the Dainty Doily and the Flirty Flamingo background paper, I thought it made a really sweet and adorable Valentine, and then I just stamped my Happy Valentine's Day on the inside. So this is my third clever idea for non-traditional Valentines. But today on the video, if we're going to make one of these samples, we are going to focus on the birthday card. I will have a tutorial that you can download that will describe all of the supplies that I used for all three of these cards. So not to worry, stay with me to the end. I'll talk a little bit about how I constructed the circle here, and I'll also, like I said, have a download with the exact supplies and colors used. So for this card, we're going to start off with a standard A2 card base. So this is 8.5 by 5.5 inches, so a half sheet of 8.5 by 11 cardstock. And then I've simply scored it at 4 1/4 and given it a good burnish with my bone folder prior to the video. Now, the next thing that we're going to want to do is we are going to cut down a piece of our designer series paper to make the front. Now, I deliberately had my designer series paper fill the entire card front. Two reasons. My first reason is that I'm actually going to be cutting through both the designer series paper and the card base using my circle dies. And so I didn't want to have a matting layer. If I had cut this a little shorter, I might have added a matting layer behind that, but I didn't want to do that because then the dies would have needed to cut through, or at least this die would have needed to cut through 3 layers, and I thought that it would be easier to simply cut through 2 layers. So no matting layer for that reason. Also, this paper is just so gorgeous, and I'm trying to make it look like a vast expanse of water. So I really didn't want any edges that didn't conform to the water of this paper. Literally, I'm going to trim this paper down so that it is the same size as a card front, which makes that 4 1/4 by 5.5. So kind of play with your piece of paper and decide which orientation you would like it to be. Remember, we're going to be lobbing off part of the side and a little bit of the bottom. So just sort of decide what you would like to cut off. On the first one, I oriented the paper in this direction. And so you can see the swirl was up in the corner. Maybe I'll do something different and this time rotate it this way. So first I'm going to go ahead and cut the paper so that it's 4 1/4 inches wide. And then I'm going to rotate the paper one time and cut it at 5.5. And this is going to give me a piece of paper equal to the size of my card front. Now, don't cast away these scraps. This is a great piece for another card, making a stripe on a card. And who knows, I might even use this to mount a sentiment. Who knows? I'm just going to save those for a project for another day. Now that I have my piece of designer series paper, I'm going to go ahead and attach it using my Stampin' Seal. You'll notice that I'm going around the edges with my seal, and I'm doing that to really make sure that I adhere it down, getting into those corners of the card and staying away from this area where I'll be cutting out my circle. So take your piece of designer series paper and try to get it perfectly lined up with all 4 edges of your card, and then give that a good press. So let's start off by nesting our dies, the largest ones, and make a pile. And then just start to nest your dies together. So let's go ahead and flip our dies over so that they nest together. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and give them a quick number to make it easier to what I'm referring to. 1, 2, 3, number 4, 7, and then 8. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the card and I'm going to decide the placement. I'm going to come up and away from the edge. Remember that I put some adhesive here and I have some adhesive here. So I'm going to come up and away from the edge, but still kind of staying down in the corner. I want to make sure I leave myself plenty of room for my sentiment. And I'm going to attach this die to my card using a couple of Post-it notes. And these Post-it notes are just going to help me to keep my die in place when I go ahead and run it through my cut and emboss machine. Now that is over on a table on the other side of the room, so I'll be right back. Okay, so I ran that through the cut and emboss machine in this direction. And now if I peel off the Post-it notes, we can see that it not only cut the layer of DSP, but it also cut the card base. These are great pieces of paper. I'm gonna set them aside for another project. So now that we have cut out our circle, we can also go ahead and make our frame. Now the frame needs to be a little larger than this opening. And part of why we're making the frame, I don't know if you can see this, but after I run the die over my designer series paper, it leaves an impression, kind of like an embossed ridge on my card, and I want to hide that. Not to mention, I think the frame really accentuates and adds something to the card. So we're going to need the die that is just slightly larger than this one. That is the one that we labeled number 7, okay? So we're just going to take a scrap of cardstock and we're going to put down our number 7 die and we're going to hold that in place. I'm going to run this through the Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. Okay. And now I have this piece. And then I'm going to take the number 3, the same die that we used here, and I'm going to line it up on this circle and make another pass and run this through the Cut and Emboss machine. Now when I take my Post-it notes off, I now have this little frame that I can use to frame up my otter. For a moment, we'll come back to that. In order to get our otter in the perfect placement, take a soft pencil with a white eraser, and I'm just going to come in and very lightly trace the outline of my circle so that when I stamp, I know where my positioning is. I didn't even do a great job making a straight circle. Not worried about it at all. We're going to erase that. But what we want to do is know where to place our stamp. Because I'll be coloring with Stampin' Blends, I'm going to bring in my Memento Tuxedo Black ink, the otter that is swimming in the water. So ink him up. And now I'm just going to use the lines on my grid paper to get my card straight. And then I'm going to stamp my otter in that pencil circle that I drew for myself, making sure that I keep the otter at the bottom of the circle. Okay? So cute. While I have the Memento ink black out, now would also be a great time to stamp the birthday hat using the birthday hat stamp and then to fussy cut that out. I did that in advance just to save us some time on the video, but since we're using the same ink, it's a great time to do that all at once, just like I cut my circles out at the same time. So I'm going to close this up so I don't make a mess with that. While we're waiting for the Tuxedo Black ink to set, I like to give it a minute to dry before I erase or start to color, just because I don't want to smear anything. Now would be a great time for us to attach our frame while we're waiting. silicone craft mat, and I'm going to take the circle that we made and flip that over. And I'm just going to use some Stampin' Seal on this and just sort of skip around a little bit and put some on here. You could also use the Tombow green glue, the mono-adhesive liquid glue. I think the seal is a little bit less messy. If you've got any excess seal, kind of tuck that in. Then I'm just going to come in and attach this to my card, making sure that I get it nice and centered around that opening. I have a little bit of extra glue, and the nice thing about the silicone craft mat is I can just rub and it comes right off. It kind of peels right off. So I'm just going to get rid of any excess glue. Terrific, okay? Now I'm going to come in with a white eraser. I can either use the eraser on the back of my pencil and just lightly erase my pencil line. You don't want the recipient to see that. Or if you want to zip along more quickly, if you have a full-size white eraser, you can also come in with that and remove the pencil line. But that is why you really want to use a soft pencil with a light touch, just so we can erase that, and now you wouldn't even know it was ever there. Now I'm going to color with my Stampin' Blends. This card I used light and dark soft suede, light and dark balmy blue, and light and dark crumb cake. For the Valentine, I also brought in Flirty Flamingo, but for this one, I stuck with these 3 colors in both tones. Now, I'm going to start off with the hat, and for the hat, I'm just going to color this in light balmy blue, going around the polka dots. Maybe this time I'll do it in blue and white. I might do that this time. Kind of really cute. Now let's come in for the otter. I'm gonna start with the dark soft suede on his little nose and just come in with the bullet tip there and color in his nose. And I've already done 3 otter cards, and each time I've colored the otters a little bit differently. I'm experimenting with them, so who knows what we'll get this time. I like to come in with a little bit of dark first and just kind of give some shading. So I'm going around the edges of the otter, just kind of giving a little bit of a dark tone, and then around the edge of the inside of his face. Be careful there around the eye. And then I'm going to quickly come in with the light version of the soft suede, this time using the brush tip. And I'm going to come right up against that darker one and try to pull a little bit of that color in and blend that. Just coloring in between those dark edges, kind of pulling that in a little bit. Give a little touch to the ears. Back around wherever I had those harsh lines, again, just trying to blend those so that as I'm adding layers of color, it's sort of building it up and taking away the notice, like you don't as much notice now that harsh line. And then on the inside, I'm going to start with a little bit of the dark crumb cake right around the edge of the face. Still gonna go over his mouth there with the dark, and maybe come up here to the eyebrows. And then I'm just gonna fill in with the light crumb cake. Again, going over the areas of the dark and kind of pulling them in and blending that all together. So I'm getting some shading, but minimizing the harshness of those lines. Really cute. All right, and now we also want to work on the water. So I'm going to use the dark balmy blue and go over the water lines. You could also do this with the bullet side. I am actually having a little trouble with my marker. I cracked it. So the bullet side on my Balmy Blue is a little inconvenient to open. And I'm also going to color in the water drops with the dark. And now I'm going to bring in the light Balmy Blue and just swish some lines across and kind of let it sort of fade out. You leave a little bit of white as though it was like foam in the water, and I'm just sort of pulling that out along from my otter. That's really sweet, right? Okay, now we have his hat. You can see on this version of his hat, I colored in the dots with the dark Balmy Blue, and I also used one of these blue adhesive back gems, and I put a gem on the pom-pom for this card. This time, I'm actually gonna bring in light smoky slate, bringing in a little bit of gray around that, kind of gives it like it's a white fluffy pom-pom. So that was light smoky slate. Just mixing it up, doing something a little bit different this time. But the gem was a really fun idea too. Okay, so now we just need a little bit of Stampin' Seal so we can attach our hat. You can see on the back here, this was an oops. The first time I stamped my hat, it didn't come out exactly the way I wanted it, so I flipped the paper over and stamped it again. And you just want to make sure that when you fussy cut, you get nice and close to that line because we don't want too much white excess there. I had a little bit more than I wanted. And so now I'm going to come in and pop his little hat on. Oh my God, he's so stinking cute. I can't stand it. I can't stand it. So cute. Okay, so now we just need our sentiments. On the front, I have this banner label, which again came from the Sweet Talk dies, and I use this banner here. And then I stamped the sentiment using the It's Birthday Time that comes from the Awesome Otters stamp set, but also I did that in crumb cake. And the crumb cake then coordinates with the inside of the otter's face. Sure you line that so that feels straight. And then I wanted an inside sentiment, so I chose to bring in this Happiest of Birthdays, and I used the It's Your Day. I'm gonna do that and finish that off. And I stamped this in the Balmy Blue. That did not come out well. I think I need to re-ink my Balmy Blue. So after I finish up this video, I'm going to go ahead and re-ink that and put a label over it. But you can see this first one came out much better. Okay, so that's our finished card. Now, that having been said, though, I do want to point out one problem with this card, and that is because I stamped on the inside of my card and I colored with blends, it bleeds through to the back. So you can see that here as well. You could leave it like that. I'm kind of a perfectionist. I don't love that. So my solution is that I am going to attach a piece of white cardstock, 5.5 by 4.25, and I'm just going to attach that to the back and create a faux back to cover up my Stampin' Blends, and I'll do that after the video so I don't take up your time. So let's bring in the other two cards that I started with so that we can talk about how these are different. Now, for this card, I used the Flirty Flamingo paper from the Simply Marvelous DSP pack. And like I said, I brought in the Sweet Conversation stamp set with the Hug Me stamp and this die. I also used the Happy Valentine's Day on the inside. Now let's talk a little bit about how I did this one. For this one, I mounted my DSP down to the card. I took the number 7 die and I cut out this circle from the front of my card. Now, because I kept the adhesive on the edges and I didn't have adhesive in the center, when I did that, it gave me 2 circles. It gave me the marbled piece of paper and it also gave me the white card piece. Then I was able to use the white card piece as my insert inside the card. So what I did was I stamped this otter on the card. Little bit of his tail was cut off at the bottom. I thought that was fine. And then I came in with my blending brush and I used the Balmy Blue and a blending brush to color around the otter, creating the water. I used the dark Balmy Blue Stampin' Blend on the water wavy marks. I colored my otter using the same light and dark crumb cake, light and dark soft suede, but the difference here is instead of using the dark soft suede on his nose, I actually used the dark Flirty Flamingo. I don't know if you can see that, but I used the dark Flirty Flamingo since this is a Valentine. His little nose actually looks a little bit like a heart. I thought that was kind of cute. And then I made the fish in both tones of the light and dark Flirty Flamingo to tie everything all together with the DSP and the sentiment. Couple of other tips. Stamping the hearts, I stamped the outline of the Candy Conversation heart and the text for both of these in Flirty Flamingo. And then I used this stamp that colors in the Candy Conversation hearts. I did this one in Blushing Bride, and I did that deliberately. I wanted it to be pink on pink, and if I had used the Flirty Flamingo, it would have made it difficult to read the word Hug Me. And on this one, I used the Balmy Blue, picking up on the color in the water. So that's how I did those. These are popped up with dimensionals. And then to get this really lacy, kind of doily-like effect, I brought in the dies from Encircled in Beauty. So that die set has these dies as well as these 2 here. I think that one, yeah, that one goes there and this one goes here. And I use these on these cards respectively. So this card, I used this one, and this card, I used this one. Now, in order to get this cut out in the doily, I put this down on my paper, and then I used the number 7 die inside of it. So again, you want to make sure that you're securing these with Post-it notes before you run it through the cut and emboss machine to make sure that if you've placed your circle in such a way that it's equidistant on all sides, that doesn't shift for you as it rolls through the machine. But I nested the 2 of these together. Now, if you remember when I did this card, first I cut out the larger circle, and then I ran it back through with a smaller circle. I had to make 2 passes through the cut and emboss machine. And the reason for that is those 2 dies are very close in size. So they're so close in size that it was difficult to get them both to be perfectly flat. So I ran them through in 2 passes. Now with this one, because this circle is so much smaller than the Encircled in Beauty die, you can just lay them both down at the same time and run it through in a single pass. Now, my last tip for this card is how do you get the proper placement for where to attach the circle that you've stamped the otter on. So how I got proper placement for this otter was I put adhesive on the back of the circle where the otter had been stamped, and then I just pressed it through the center hole, lifted up the card, and then smoothed it down into place, and then I had my otter in the exact perfect placement for this card. So there's a little tip there. And then finally, if we want to look at this card, I did very similar things. Again, I cut the DSP down to fit the full size of the card base. Then I used the number 7 die to cut out my circle. Then I brought in another piece of white paper where first I put down this die and then I nested the number 7 in between, taking care to line it up evenly all around. And then I ran this through the Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine in a single pass. Once I did that, I ended up with this piece here. And then I brought in fresh freesia and a blending brush. And I used the blending brush to just rub some fresh freesia around this before I mounted it down. I thought this fresh freesia was a really nice complement to the Gorgeous Grape. You'll also notice that all of this paper has 2 sides. So on the Balmy Blue and the Flirty Flamingo, I used the marbly side. And on this card with the Gorgeous Grape, instead of using the marbly side, I flipped it over. I mean, this is marbly too, I guess, but these to me looked more like water. This really, like he was swimming and he's swimming. They looked a lot like water. Since this otter wasn't necessarily meant to be in water, I decided to flip the paper over and use this side, which really looks like marble. And for 5 circle, to cut out my sentiment label, "You are otterly awesome," which of course comes from the Awesome Otters stamp set, "You are otterly awesome." So I cut out that circle, I stamped this in Gorgeous Grape, and I brought in a little bit of ribbon in the corner, and I just ran a strip of ribbon underneath it in the corner. I used this glittered organdy ribbon, which has some nice shimmer to it. Afterward, though, I remembered that I have this sheer ribbon in Gorgeous Grape, and I kind of regretted that I didn't use that. I mean, obviously underneath, but I think that would have been really great as well. Or another option would have been to use the Fresh Freesia in color ribbon. There's some sheer Fresh Freesia ribbon that for the life of me, I cannot lay my hands on right now, but it looks just like this. This one is polished pink. But this comes in Fresh Freesia, and if I could have located that, I might have also considered using that on this card. Lots of awesome ribbon choices, though, for this card. Now, the one last thing I would mention about this card, so you can see on this one, I stamped on the inside and let it peek through. That created the problem with the blends that I then need to mask. On this one, I stamped on a circle insert, which prevents the problem with the blends bleeding through, but then you see the circle on the inside. On this one, I actually fussy cut the otter. So I just took my scissors and fussy cut the otter, and then I attached him with a wobble. One of these little mechanisms where you peel off the adhesive backing on the front and the back, and you attach the die cut or the fussy cut image to the front, and then this to the back of the card, and then he wobbles. It creates motion, which is really kind of fun. These wobbles are not a Stampin' Up! Product. You can find them online in a number of crafting online websites. They're also available on Amazon, but they are not a product that we sell through Stampin' Up! I couldn't resist with this little critter, and I thought you'd let me get away with it. A little bit of contraband there. So cute, so stinking cute. Can't stand it. I mentioned this before, and I should have, but the reason why I attached the DSP to the card base before I cut was, one, it's efficient. I only had to make one pass through the cut and emboss machine to cut through both the DSP and the card base. But more importantly, it was because it ensured that I had an exact match of my circle lining up. If I tried to cut my circle out of my DSP and then go cut it from the card base, there's a fat chance that I would be able to get that in the exact same spot twice. And so I do recommend that you attach the DSP prior to cutting, because I think it will give you a better option for lining that up. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video, that you've gotten yet another idea for a clever Valentine using non-traditional stamp sets, and that you've gotten some fun ideas on playing with the awesome otters as well as this Simply Marvelous paper. If you would like to order any of these products and you don't have a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator, I would love to be your Stampin' Up! Demonstrator. Please go down in the description and look for a link to my online store. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you'd give it a thumbs up. And please, again, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and click on the notifications bell so that you're notified each time I upload a new video. I have had the best time making these. It is freezing cold outside, but it was so lovely in here with my awesome otters that I had a great day. Hope you did too. Thanks so much. Until the next time. Bye.